The first thing I remember is the sound of the lock clicking from the outside. It was sharp, final, and deliberate. In that instant, I understood something had changed forever. This was not anger. This was intent. My name is Harold Whitaker, and the man who locked me inside that bathroom was my son, Derek. The reason was so small it almost felt unreal. I had used too much hot water. The bathroom was narrow, windowless, and cold. The tile floor drained the warmth from my body as the steam faded. I stood there at first, towel in my hands, waiting for the sound of the lock reversing. It never came. I knocked once, then twice, calling his name calmly. There was no answer. Instead, I heard footsteps moving away, followed by laughter drifting down the hallway. Derek and his wife, Monica, were settling in for the evening. I lowered myself onto the edge of the tub, then onto the floor when my legs grew tired. The house was quiet except for the television and their voices. I owned that house. I had paid for it. And yet I was sealed inside one small room like a problem someone wanted out of sight. That first night stretched endlessly. Hunger came early. The cold came later. Sleep never fully arrived. Each time I closed my eyes, my back stiffened against the tile, or a pipe rattled and startled me awake. By morning, my mouth was dry and my hands shook slightly as I drank from the sink. I told myself this would end soon. Derek would cool off. He always had before. He did not. When the second day passed without the door opening, I understood this was no punishment. It was a message. I was no longer a father. I was an inconvenience. I raised Derek alone. His mother, Elaine, died when he was 8 years old after a sudden illness in Cleveland, Ohio. From the day we buried her, I decided my son would never feel abandoned. I worked mornings cleaning office buildings and nights unloading trucks near the river docks. On weekends, I repaired fences, fixed engines, and painted houses for cash. I skipped meals so Derek could eat. I wore the same coat for years so he could have new shoes. When his school needed money for trips or books, I found it. I paid his college tuition in full. While he studied in heated classrooms, I scrubbed floors after midnight, my hands raw from detergent and cold water. I never told him. When Derek married Monica, I gave them my house in Toledo, Ohio. I called it a gift. I believed love did not need contracts. I moved into a small bedroom at the back of the house and kept to myself. I cooked quietly. I cleaned my space. I stayed invisible. Over time, gratitude faded. Derek began correcting how I lived. The lights were too bright. The food smelled wrong. The water ran too long. Monica never stopped him. Sometimes she smiled. The bathroom door finally opened on the third morning. Derek stood there without looking at me and said, "Don't waste water again." I stepped past him without a word. Silence was all I had left that he could not control. In my room, I sat on the bed and looked at the old steel safe in the corner. Inside it were documents Derek had never asked about and never questioned. The house deed was still in my name. I did not rush. For days, I acted as if nothing had happened. I spoke politely. I followed the rules. I waited. At night, I contacted my attorney in Columbus, Ohio. I confirmed ownership. I arranged a private sale. Derek talked openly about renovations. He spoke as if the house were permanent, as if I were temporary. 3 weeks later, the papers were signed. The funds were transferred. Before dawn the next morning, I packed one suitcase. Clothes, documents, Elaine's watch. Nothing else. I left the keys in an envelope for my attorney and stepped into the quiet street. By the time Derek woke up, strangers were moving furniture through the front door. I was already airborne, headed toward Port Townsend, Washington, where the ocean was louder than memory. I did not take revenge. I took my dignity. Today, I wake to waves instead of arguments. I take long showers. I drink my coffee slowly. I do not wonder if Derek understands. Understanding is not required for consequences. He locked me in a bathroom to remind me of my place. I left and reminded him of his. Freedom does not arrive all at once. It comes quietly, like breath returning after you thought your lungs had forgotten how to work. When I first arrived in Port Townsend, I rented a modest room above a hardware store near the marina. The walls were thin, the furniture mismatched, but no one told me how to live inside it. The first night, I slept on top of the covers, fully dressed, unsure if rest was allowed. Years of tension do not disappear simply because the door is unlocked. In the morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and landed on the floor like an invitation. I stood there for a long time, listening to the gulls, letting the sound replace the echo of footsteps I used to fear. I bought a small house 3 months later, a weathered place with cedar siding and a narrow porch facing the water. It was nothing like the one I left behind, and that was the point. Ownership feels different when it is ear. Twice. I learned the rhythm of the town quickly. Mornings began with coffee from a corner cafe run by a woman named Lillian Brooks, who never asked personal questions and always remembered my order. Afternoons were for walking the shoreline, watching boats drift in and out, their names painted proudly along the hulls. At night, I cooked simple meals and ate them slowly, something I had forgotten how to do. No one rushed me. No one counted minutes. Sometimes, while washing dishes, I would pause and let the hot water run longer than necessary. Not out of waste, but as a reminder. I did not contact Derek. I did not block him either. Silence does not need reinforcement. My attorney informed me that Derek had called repeatedly during the first week after the sale. His messages moved from anger to confusion to desperation. He demanded explanations. He claimed betrayal. He insisted there had been a misunderstanding. There was none. Monica called once. Her voice was controlled, polite, as if manners could undo history. I let it go to voicemail. I was not interested in hearing regret that only arrived once consequences did. Some nights, memory returned without warning. Not the bathroom, but earlier moments. Derek asleep on the couch with his homework spread across his chest. His laughter when I taught him how to ride a bike on a cracked sidewalk in Dayton, Ohio. Love does not vanish just because respect does. That is the cruelest part. But love does not require proximity to survive. I joined a local community center and volunteered twice a week helping teenagers with basic repairs and practical skills. They listened. They thanked me. They respected instruction without resentment. One afternoon, a boy asked why I never talked about my family. I told him some stories are finished even if the people in them are still alive. He nodded as if he understood more than his age suggested. News traveled slowly, but it always traveled. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Derek and Monica moved into a small apartment outside Akron, Ohio. Derek took on extra shifts. Monica returned to work full-time. They argued often, according to what I was told. Stress has a way of revealing fractures that comfort conceals. I did not feel satisfaction hearing this. Only confirmation. Power gained through cruelty never lasts. One evening, nearly a year after I left, I received a letter. Handwritten. Derek's name on the envelope. I did not open it immediately. I let it sit on the table for days, reminding myself that curiosity is optional. When I finally read it, the words were carefully measured. He wrote about mistakes, about pressure, about not realizing how far things had gone. He did not mention the bathroom. He did not name the harm. Accountability avoided still counts as avoidance. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I did not respond. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, must come from truth, not convenience. Seasons changed. I planted a small garden behind the house. Tomatoes, herbs, things that required patience. Growth feels different now. Slower. More deliberate. I no longer measured my worth by sacrifice. I measured it by peace. On the anniversary of my arrival, I walked the beach at dawn. The tide was low, the sand smooth and unmarked. I thought about how easily people confuse generosity with weakness. How often kindness is mistaken for obligation. I thought about Elaine, and how she would have wanted me to live, not endure. If Derek ever learns anything from what happened, it will not be because I explained it. It will be because life eventually explains what parents no longer can. I am not hiding. I am simply no longer available for harm. The house I left behind was just wood and stone. The life I built after was something else entirely. No locked door can hold a man who finally understands his own worth. And no apology can undo a moment when dignity is deliberately taken. I wake each morning knowing I am exactly where I am meant to be. Free not because I escaped, but because I chose myself when no one else would. Time has a way of sending down sharp memories, not by erasing them, but by teaching you how to hold them without bleeding. 2 years passed. Then 3. My life settled into a rhythm that no longer needed defending. I learned the names of the tides and how the weather announces itself before it arrives. I learned which mornings carried fog and which carried clarity. Most importantly, I learned that peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply stays. I stopped expecting the past to knock on my door. When it did, I was no longer as tartlet. One autumn afternoon, while repairing a loose step on my porch, I saw a familiar figure walking slowly up the path. Derek looked older, thinner. His shoulders carried a weight I recognized because I had worn it once myself. He stopped several feet away, as if unsure whether crossing the distance required permission. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ocean filled the space where words usually rushed in. He said my name quietly, without authority, without expectation. I did not invite him inside. I did not tell him to leave. I waited. Derek finally spoke about the apartment, the bills, the strain. He spoke about regret without naming it, about lessons learned too late. Then, at last, he mentioned the bathroom. His voice broke when he said it. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the truth. He said he had replayed those 2 days in his mind more times than he could count. He said he had not understood power until he lost it. I listened without interrupting. Listening does not mean agreeing. It means allowing someone to be heard without rescuing them from their own reflection. When he finished, he waited. I told him I had not come here to be forgiven or to forgive. I came here to live. I told him that love without respect becomes something dangerous, something capable of cruelty. I told him that locking me away did not hurt me the most. Treating me as disposable did. He nodded, tears forming but not falling. He did not ask for anything. That was new. I told him I hoped he would become a man who never needed to learn compassion through loss again. Then I wished him well. Derek left without asking to return, without asking where I would be tomorrow. That too was new. I watched him walk back down the path until he disappeared into the trees. I did not feel victory. I felt closure. Closure is not reconciliate. It is understanding where the line must remain. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun sank into the water, painting the sky in quiet colors that did not ask to be admired. I thought about the man I had been when I first became a father, convinced that giving everything was the same as loving well. I understand now that love must include limits or it becomes a place where dignity goes to disappear. I had once mistaken endurance for virtue. I no longer did. The bathroom, the lock, the cold floor, those memories no longer defined me. They had become markers, not prisons. I slept that night without dreams, the kind of rest that only comes when nothing inside you is still negotiating with the past. In the morning, I brewed coffee and opened the windows wide. The air carried salt and promise. Somewhere far away, Derek was living with the consequences of his choices. Somewhere close, I was living with the results of mine. I had not taken revenge. I had taken responsibility for my own life. There is a difference. Family should never require you to shrink. Home should never be a place where fear dictates behavior. I gave my son everything I could. What I kept, finally, was myself. And that alone was enough.